And welcome everybody to another edition of the GSMC Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. As always, I'm your host Kenneth Grunfelder, and it's great to have you guys here on this Wednesday, May 1st. We have a lot to talk about on the show today. Before I get into that, just want to remind you guys, as always, to tip or donate and get your comments recognized, make sure to go to the following link, that is GSMCPodcast.net. Again, that really helps the show. Makes the show more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. Again, that is GSMCPodcast.net. And as always, it is displayed on the ticker at the bottom of the show segment down below. So, with that being said, let's get into what we are going to talk about for today. So, saw an article yesterday about the possibilities for the Chiefs when it comes to who they will play to start the season. So, I'll get into that in the first segment here. What team should they open up against? And there's a few teams that could definitely be viable candidates for that. So we'll get into that at the start of the show here. Then in the second part of the show, we will talk about the power rankings that NFL.com came out with post the NFL draft. So I'll get into that, give you my thoughts on it, where teams are lined up currently in that. And that'll be the second part of the show. Then in the third part of the show, we'll talk about a few things regarding the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll talk about them picking up the fifth-year options of quarterback Trevor Lawrence and running back Travis Etienne. We'll talk about their draft, as well as them releasing Zay Jones. And that definitely comes off of them drafting Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round, the LSU wide receiver. So they let him go. We'll get into all that in the third part of the show. And then in the final part of the show, we'll talk about the top remaining free agents. With the draft being over, we'll get into that. Michael Gallup was one of those top free agents, and he got signed by the Raiders. So we'll get into the remaining free agents and where they could potentially end up. So that's the rundown for the show for today. So let's get into the first topic, which is talking about who should play the Chiefs in the season opener. So I actually do have a graphic. We're going to use a graphic for this segment here. So get excited. And right here, I have the opponents when the Chiefs are at home. So you got the Broncos, the Bengals, the Chargers, the Texans, the Raiders, the Saints, the Ravens, and the Buccaneers who are kind of cut off. But those are their home opponents for 2024. And I think there's at least three or four that stick out and are most likely going to be selected. I think it's going to come down to either the Ravens, the Bengals, or the Texans. And then I think the Chargers are like that fourth team. I think if the Chargers still had, I don't think it really makes a difference, but their offense is going to be changing because they let a lot of guys go. But you still have Justin Herbert and you got Jim Harbaugh there. So that there's still there still is appeal with picking the Chargers as the first opponent. But I think it's going to come down to the Ravens, the Bengals, and the Texans. Those are going to be the three. And because with the Raiders, although the Christmas matchup was good just because, the Raiders did beat them. And maybe the Chiefs want to get some revenge. But they're going to want to get revenge later in the season. The Broncos, and we'll see with Gardner Minshew being the starting quarterback. It's either going to be him or Aiden O'Connell. And then with the Broncos, their quarterback situation, they drafted Bo Nix, but I don't know. Is he going to be starting day one? I don't think so, but we'll see. And then you have the Saints and the Buccaneers. They're probably not going to be chosen either. So it's going to come down to, like I said, the three teams that I just said. Now, which one is the most appealing? Because with the Ravens, that would be the AFC Championship game rematch from last year. So that's a great candidate. Then you got the Bengals, a team that they've played a lot the last few seasons, really. Last year they played him without Joe Burrow, but they played him in back-to-back AFC Championship games. And they usually give us a good game. It's usually a one-score game. And, not even just one score, but 3 points, really. So, could be the Bengals. And then you got the Texans. The Texans, with the offseason moves that they've made, they're on the come up. They're going to be one of the top teams in the AFC. You got C.J.Stroud in year 2, and especially with them going out and trading for Stephon Diggs, there's a lot of appeal there as well. Now, personally for me, what opponent would be the best? I think you got to go with the Bengals. I think that's what I would do to open up the season. I mean, the storyline's going in. Burrow coming back from the wrist injury. And we'll see what ends up happening with T. Higgins. Because, I mean, he wants to stay in Cincinnati. Bengals got to work out a long-term deal with them. Bengals did draft a wide receiver in their draft, which could end up being the replacement for T. Higgins. But I think that would be a great way to start off the year. I mean, either way, if they pick the Texans, they pick the Ravens, I mean, I think that's great. You get, the reigning MVP in Lamar Jackson, or if you pick the Texans. Although I would like to see the Chiefs and the Texans match up later in the season, just so the Texans can kind of gel, and then we see them play later in the year. But either way, I'd be excited for the matchup. So I mean, it's really not that hard to kind of figure out who it's going to end up being. It's going to be one of those 3 teams. Now, I'd be surprised if they end up picking the Raiders or the Broncos. Now, again, the divisional opponents, same thing with the Chargers, too. I mean, I think they would take the Chargers over the Broncos and the Raiders because of, the matchups that Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes have had over the years. Those games are usually close. But it's going to be different now because the Chargers, their offense is going to be different. No Keenan Allen, no Mike Williams, no Austin Eckler. You got the Ravens backfield with Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. A young receiving core. But, again, I that would be an appealing matchup as well. But, like I said, I think it's going to come down to the 3 teams that I said. The Ravens, the Texans, and the Bengals. Now, they could throw a curveball at us and say, hey, you know what? We want to open up against the Buccaneers because they beat us in the Super Bowl back in 2020, so we want to show them us raising, the banner on opening night, even though there's no more Tom Brady. Now, if Tom Brady was still playing, that would also be an appealing matchup. Very appealing. And you guys know I like Baker Mayfield a lot, and Baker Mayfield and Patrick Mahomes have had some good matchups over the years. And you go back to college, they had a great matchup there. But it's not going to be the Buccaneers. I mean, hey, the Saints with Derek Carr, yeah. He's going to be playing at Arrowhead regardless, but it's not going to be the Saints. But it gets you excited when you see things coming out like, oh, who is this team going to be playing? Who are the Chiefs going to be playing in the season opener? We're getting close to the release of the schedule. That's coming out very soon. I want to say it's next week or the week after. I don't know the exact date, but it's in May. Now they don't tell us the schedule release date until we get very close to it. You just know it's in May every year. It's like the first, second week of May, whatever it is. But it's exciting. But that's the next thing that we're looking forward to now is when the schedule comes out. Because now the draft's over. Free agency has cooled off. Although we'll talk about some of the remaining free agents later in the show. But this is kind of like that last thing to look forward to. Before, of course, we got the season, but this is the last thing before we start getting to looking towards next season. Really looking towards it. Because now we're getting into we're getting into the summer soon. We got this whole month, and then we get into June, and the summer's going to fly by, which, again, I don't want it to, but that's what happens. So, the schedule, whenever that is released, we're going to cover that. We'll go through the opponents for teams, matchups, things like that. Because we have who everybody's playing. We just don't know where everybody's playing and when everybody's playing. So, I mean, there's a couple things we know. At least we know who's going to be playing the night after the opener, and that's the Packers and the Eagles. They'll be playing each other week 1 in Brazil. We know that we're going to have the triple header on Thanksgiving, the double header on Christmas. We know all that. We just got to find out who's playing what. Well, we know the Lions and the Cowboys are playing on Thanksgiving. We know that. But we got to see who they're playing. So it's an exciting time. We're getting close. Well, still not really, but we're getting closer. That's what I meant to say. But like I said, the schedule release, that's like the last major piece before we start getting into, the regular season. I mean, yeah, we got the whole summer. You got the preseason. But that's where we're at right now. So, but back to the original thing. I think now I would say the Bengals. What do I think? I mean, I could see that. I could see it being the Ravens. I feel like the Texans are probably third. I would say the Ravens and the Bengals are probably the top 2 teams that they're deciding on. And then the Texans are third. But they could look at it and say, wow, the Texans have made a lot of moves this offseason. You got Stephon Diggs, C.J.Stroud, year 2. Maybe that's the team they decide to pick. Could be. Regardless, those are the top 3 right there. And if they went with the Chargers, I'd be okay with that too. Because again, Herbert and Mahomes have had great matchups over the years. But I feel like it's going to come down to either the Ravens or the Bengals. I said the Bengals, but maybe they say, let's have the AFC Championship game rematch, week 1. It's possible. But let me know what you guys think. Who should play the Chiefs in the season opener? I think it's going to come down to the teams I just said. Top 3, Ravens, Bengals, and Texans. Those 3. Maybe the Chargers are 4th, and then you got the other teams. No disrespect, but yeah, it's the NFL is going to want to have a big matchup. They want it to be one that fans are going to be just rushing home from work on that Thursday to watch. Even though it's not on till 8. But I'm just saying. And I don't think Broncos Chiefs is going to be that. If that was the case, but it's not going to be. It's going to come down to those 3 teams. The Ravens, the Texans, and the Bengals. Now, if something ends up happening where that's not the case, all right, then I was wrong. But that's what I think. It's going to come down to the Ravens and the Bengals, I would imagine. But the Texans, maybe they go with them because they made a lot of moves. They made a lot of moves this offseason. But either way, one of those 3 teams, it'll be a good matchup. So looking forward to it. And we still got some time to go. But like I said, we're getting closer. Little by little, we're getting closer. So we're going to take our first break of the show now. And when we come back, we will discuss the power rankings that were released after the 2024 draft. I'll talk about that, where teams are located within the power rankings, and give my opinion on it. So, with that being said, stick around, and we'll be right back here on the GSMC Football Podcast.